Testing, 1, 2. We were. Looks like it. Oh, no.
My name is Katie Hall. I'm from Goucher College with the Oral History of the Holocaust Survivors class. We're here with Rosa Marx. And with me are Hannah Spiegelman as the note taker and Allison Susser, not pictured, as the videographer. So before we start talking about during the war, is there anything that you want to mention before that time?
I don't know. It seems we covered it quite a bit last time. I don't know what I forgot. If I'd seen the tape, maybe I would remember. But basically, I just want to say it was a great young life for me. And I was an only child, and I was spoiled, and I was not spoiled in the way children are spoiled today, but I guess more indulged than some children. You know, had several siblings, and my mother had me late in life, and so on. I don't know. Can I add something maybe next time at the next interview?
Sure.
Remember something? Okay.
So in our previous interview, you talked about the Anschluss, when Austria was integrated, annexed to Germany. How did you find out about the annexation?
Well, we had a radio, and there was a lot of turmoil in the air. There was all kinds of different parties were like trying to gain the election, you know, and then we heard all this commotion on the radio. I guess I imagine that's how I found out. I'm trying to remember. It must have been before newspaper. It must have been on the radio. And within a very short time, they were marching in. They were waiting on the border, and the next day they were marching down the main street of the section where we lived in Vienna. And not just a few people, thousands and thousands of soldiers were coming in with tanks, and a lot of the illegals who had worked underground for the Nazi party suddenly came out with their uniforms and were shouting Sieg Heil, which means hail to the chief or whatever. And I guess Sieg Heil means we won, hail to us or something.
So these were the German soldiers marching through Vienna?
Yeah, these were German soldiers marching through Vienna. Right, Anna? These were German?
Yes.
Yeah, they were German.
What changed after the annexation, and how quickly did that happen?
Well, everything really changed from one day to the next day. It was basically, I guess, prepared underground, so it's not like they didn't know what to do, you know. They overthrew the present government, and Austria became part of Germany. And of course the Jews were immediately persecuted because we were one of the very few Jews in that particular district of Vienna. So they had their eye on us for a long time to get after us. So within 2 days after the annexation, 6 brown shirts, means 6 Nazis in a brown uniform came to our door, and they didn't arrest us, they put us under, it's called Schutzhaft, which means security imprisonment. In other words, they made believe the population would go after us, and they were keeping us safe from the wrath of the population. So they stayed with us overnight in the apartment. Some were outside, some were in the apartment. And the second night, we were taken to what's called the Browner House, which means their headquarters. They had an illegal house, I guess it had brown paint, so that everybody knew the Browner House. So at that time, an uncle, my father's brother, also lived with us. He had come from Poland to learn the food business. They took him along. So we were taken in a room, and we were told that was during the night, that all of us had to face the wall, each one in a corner. My father, my mother, I, and my father's brother. And we were standing there for a few hours, and they told me, don't turn around. In the meantime, they were beating up my father and my uncle. I didn't see it because I wasn't allowed to turn. So then when that was finished, they separated me from my parents. And that time was morning. So they had a large kitchen. And a lot of these Nazis were having breakfast. So they said to me, "Shoo, girl, you fix our breakfast. Turn on the stove." You know, it was March, it was still cold. And I said, "But the coals in the stove are still hot." You know, they weren't burning red, but they still had fire on them. I mean, not fire, they were just not finished. You know, like when you have a barbecue and the coals have to be all finished. So they said, "Oh, that doesn't matter." So I said, "Well, where's the shovel to get the coals out?" They said, "You don't need a shovel, just use your hands." So since the coals were still partly burned, I burned all my fingertips on the hot coals. Then when that was done, they said, "Well, I bet you never know how to clean windows. Now you're going to do windows." So they had windows in the kitchen there. So they put me up there. They was kind of high, and with my hands that were really, you know, partly injured, I had to clean windows.
How old were you at this time?
14.
14. And when the brown shirts came and put you on the, what was that, the Schutz?
Schutzhaft. When the Nazis, yeah, the SR came, SA they're called, the Socialist Party.
Okay. Do you know how to spell that word?
The
Schutz.
Schutzhaft, oh yeah, SCHUTCHAF like in Frank, T.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
When did you return home after you were taken to the Brown House?
After I was taken to the Brown House, I was taken, my parents and I both were first taken to a local little jail in the general area where we live. It's a plain, like a county jail, you know, they had jail cells. So I was separated, I was put in a jail cell, and my parents were put in other cells individually. And after they got me and they transferred me to the, it wasn't the local police, it was the police overseeing a larger area. And they had a jail attached to this police station. So this was like a regular local jail. But the other one was even smaller, the first one. So when the warden saw me, he really didn't know what to do with me because he saw a young girl. They never had anybody like me in jail.
Did they tell you why you were in jail?
No, that'll come later. So I was in that jail, and he must have gotten in touch with other authorities. I stayed in that particular jail, like a regular little jail, for 10 days. The warden was very sorry for me, but there's nothing he could do. He couldn't let me go. So then I was transferred to the main Vienna women's jail called Elisabeth Promenade. That's the women's main jail in Vienna.
Could you spell that?
Huh?
Could you spell
Spell, yeah, you know, like Elizabeth, the name Elizabeth.
Mm-hmm.
with a Z?
Elisabeth. Promenade is another word. P like in Paul. It's like promenade.
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay.
Promenade, yes.
So when I got there in jail, they fingerprinted me and they photographed me and they put me in a cell that was a single cell but 5 or 6 other girls were with me in the same cell. I was the youngest one, so I was like the baby. The other girls were lovely girls. A couple of them were not Jewish. One was picked up because she was going out with a Jewish boyfriend. She had a Jewish boyfriend. And there were different reasons, I don't know. That one I especially remember. Very, very pretty girl, had a Jewish boyfriend, was picked up in the street because someone must have told that she's dating a Jewish guy. So every day we got some cold, it wasn't really coffee, but it's an imitation coffee. I mean, I never drank coffee in my life. That was in a dry piece of bread. Lunchtime there was some watery soup. And we were 6 girls in the same cell, and every night they brought in straw mattresses for us to sleep on. And all day long there was just one bench, and some of us sat on the bench, and some of us sat on the floor. We took turns. And there was a toilet and a little sink with cold water. So if you needed to use the bathroom, you had to do it in front of everybody. So at first it was terrible, to get used to that. But after a while you just do it. You have no choice. So that's what happened. So and then once a day we were taken out in a courtyard for exercise. About half an hour you went around in a circle with a whole group of other people. And I did not know what had happened to my mother and father. But one day, when I was walking in a circle with my group of prisoners, I saw my mother in another circle walking next to a famous movie actress, Uta Larkey. She's Jewish. She'd been picked up in a beautiful fur coat, and she was walking in this gorgeous fur coat still next to my mother. Another time, we were taken to jail, to the courtyard for exercise. And as we were walking down the steps, a group of men who had come back from exercise was walking up. And that instant, I realized that was my father coming up the steps. But I couldn't talk to him and I couldn't say anything. When we came back from that walk, I was so hysterical, I was laughing for the longest time. Instead of crying, I was laughing. So I stayed in that jail for approximately 3 months, and one day they said, they want you at the office or whatever it is. They put me in one of these police wagons, and they took me to the, I didn't know where I was going, but I was in a police van. Hotel Metropole, which was the headquarters of the black stormtroopers, they were called. What were they called?
SS.
Yes, yeah, but they had a special name.
The name was Schutzstaffel. That's where the SS comes from.
These were the most vicious, the black with the black uniforms. So there I was in this beautiful hotel. There were other people sitting also waiting to be questioned. And all these people were so nervous and so worried. Actually, I wasn't that worried. I don't know, I guess maybe I was too young to be quite that concerned. So when my turn came, there was this secretary, like you see Nazi movies a lot of times, you see these tall, blonde women with big buns and with a uniform. I don't know if you've ever seen that. One of those came and got me. And she took me in the room with this top Nazi in black uniform. And he said to me, do you know why you're here and why you're in jail? I said, no, sir, I don't know why I'm here. He says, you are the leader of a young communist cell. That's what he said, that's why you're here. I said, sir, I don't even know what this party is about. And he says, that's why you're here. And then he motioned to her again. I mean, he talked to me a few minutes. I don't know what he said. I can't recall the conversation. It was all crazy accusations to make a reason why they arrested me. So then I was taken back to jail, and then in that office there where they admit prisoners, they gave me a piece of paper that says I had to sign that I have no recourse while I was in jail and that I have no grievance against the thing, which is really a most unusual thing because later on they didn't ask you to sign anything, they just took you and killed you. So this was already, this was a mild thing compared to what came later. So then they told me go back to the cell and get your coat. So I put on my coat and they took me to the main prison gate and said you can go. This jail, first of all, was an hour and a half away from walking to where I lived. Plus I had no keys, I didn't know where my parents are.
Where was the jail?
Huh?
Where was the jail?
Sauerland.
Sauerland.
Rosauer, that's the name of the street where it was, the jail.
What was that?
Rosauer, R-O-S-S-A-U-E-R, next word is Lende, L-A-E-N-D-E, Lende.
It was an hour and a half away from your home?
If I had to walk it.
Okay.
I had no money, and I was wearing my winter coat, and it was summertime. But my father had a sister who lived about half an hour away from the jail. So that's where I was heading. So when they saw me, they were just amazed, And then my aunt immediately called my cousin, the one who had been working in my father's mother's store that I told you last time about.
Mm-hmm.
And she took me in. The first thing she did is delouse me because I was crawling with lice all over my head. And she gave me my favorite meal. She cooked for me. She gave me dumplings with mushrooms and a tossed like a Boston lettuce kind of salad. So then she told me that my parents were still in jail because what I didn't mention is relatives, if they wanted to, could bring you laundry once a week for a change. So they took, if you had relatives, they let you take the laundry, come and pick up your dirty laundry and bring you clean underwear. So my parents were still in jail and I stayed with my cousin and her father. He was a widower.
What was your cousin's name again?
Binnie, B-I-N-N-I-E. Her real name was Sabine, but everybody called her Binnie. So about 10 days later, my parents were released. And
Did they say why your parents were in jail?
no, they never said anything to them, as far as I know. They never gave a reason. And by the way, before my parents were released, my cousin had keys to our apartment. So she went back, I don't know whether the door was open or whether she needed keys, and the apartment had been completely ransacked. In other words, they're looking for jewelry. They took stuff, like silver, jewelry, anything of worth, and had overturned all the drawers, all the furniture, looking for hidden stuff because they didn't find enough.
What months were you in jail?
I was in jail March, April, May, and part of June.
Okay.
Okay. So then after my parents came home, we had no money because everything was taken. We relied on the Jewish organizations for food, and our family helped out a little because where my relatives lived, things were not quite that bad because they had enough Jews to go around to torture. They couldn't torture everybody at the same time and do things to them, So they helped out a little. And then we knew we couldn't stay in Vienna or in Austria anymore because things were so bad and things were getting bad, worse all the time. My father was arrested a couple of times. One time was Crystal Night, I gave you a little slip, I think, to read that. Did you read any of the paper I gave you?
No, we're not going to look at that until the
Okay.
end.
We didn't want to spoil anything.
Yeah.
All right.
So if you
Okay.
could talk
Well,
about...
there's a lot to talk about.
What happened to your parents' shop?
Oh, that was all. I understand the neighbors told me it took 7 trucks to take everything out.
And they did that while
They
you were
cleaned-
in prison?
While we were not there. So since we knew we couldn't stay, my mother had a brother in New York, and my father had a brother in New York. So we asked them to get us affidavits, in other words, permission to emigrate. I was born in Vienna, my parents were born in Poland, which means it was 2 different quota systems. The Polish quota was much more filled, so it means eventually my turn would come before my parents.
Did you return to school at all?
No, the school part was very interesting. I'm glad you asked, because when I came out of jail, I wanted to go back to school, but I knew I couldn't, so I went to the teacher to return my books, you know. And I was a very good student. I was like teacher's pet. And I came to school with several books to return them. And she said to me, her name was Frau Knauer, Knauer. I hope she goes down in her own history. She said to me, where have you been? I said, Mrs. Knauer, I was in jail. You were in jail. What did you do? I said, I didn't do anything. She says, that's impossible. Well, she says, at least your father must have owed income taxes. I said, Mrs. Knauer, my father never owed anything to anybody, and he did not owe income taxes. So then they didn't allow Jews anymore to attend school with Christian girls. It was the end of the school year anyway. So they put me in a Jewish school for a few days with other children also came from other schools who were combined.
May I interject? For a teacher to reason that a 14-year-old child was put in jail and was satisfied with her own answer. Your father owned income tax.
I mean, mind-boggling.
That's why you put a 14-year-old child in jail?
And this was a very cultured, talented woman who liked me a lot.
Could you spell her name again?
The woman's name, the teacher?
Mhm.
Yeah, her name was Margarete Knauer, means Margaret Knauer, Knauer. As a matter of fact, when I made the Spielberg tape, I talk about that, and the Holocaust Museum, I think this exhibit might be finished, but 6 people were picked out to talk about teachers, and my tape from many, many tapes was selected as showing what this mind-boggling mindset was.
Did you see any of the school children when you were out of jail?
All my girlfriends were Christian, and I had 2 very, very good girlfriends in class. But when they saw me afterwards, one of them, one day my mother and I had gone to the store and they were coming the other way. They stepped off the curb to the other side of the curb and made believe they never saw me. They never had any contact with me. There was one very decent girl, she was not a schoolmate, but she lived across the street, and she was basically Czech, but living in Vienna. And they were very nice to me, and as a matter of fact, when the Nazis, brown shirts, were keeping me under house arrest, she came to see me. And they let her in, she says she just wants to play with me or whatever. And she said to me, she whispered to me, if you have jewelry or anything of value that you want me to take back to our house, I'll do it. And somehow I was able to communicate that to my parents, and they said no, they didn't want to do that. As a matter of fact, after the war I found her, her name was Vera, And I used to send her very nice money put in envelopes to help her because things were bad in Czechoslovakia. And for a few dollars you could really do a lot, you know. And then in, let's see, in the 1970s, no, in the 80s, right? We all came in the 80s, yeah. We invited her and she stayed with us for 4 weeks here. She came. And one year, when we took our grandson to see his ancestry and where he came from, we went to see her in Prague. She lived in Prague. So I'm trying to go back to what point we're in. So talking about emigration.
Yeah. How long were you in Austria after you got out of jail?
I left for the United States in November 9, 1939. And I came to this country by myself.
So that was a year after
About a year and a half, yeah. In the meantime, before I came, I had signed up with a Zionist organization to maybe go to Israel. That time was Palestine. So I attended classes to prepare myself, and also this Jewish organization had a farm where they prepared you for agriculture. So I was a very small girl, you know, and I did like digging the dirt, you know, turning it over, learning how to hatch eggs, how to do carpentry, but that only lasted a few weeks, you know, but all that. So when my next came to go to the United States, I got, you know, an invitation to go to the United States. I also had an invitation to go to Palestine. But my parents said, we want you to go to the United States because we're already in our 50s. We're too old to live in the kibbutz and do agriculture. You know what a kibbutz is? It's a Jewish agricultural community. So I didn't take that certificate to go to Israel, and I instead signed up for the United States. When my next came to be called to go to the United States, you have to appear before the consulate and a doctor. I got the measles.
You have to tell
Did I
me.
forget something?
No, but when we talk about numbers, these are numbers given by the U.S. State Department. Because there were so many people
Trying to get out.
trying to come here, and the problem was to get the affidavit. If you didn't have an affidavit, if someone didn't give you an affidavit, numbers don't mean anything, because without an affidavit, you're not even
It
considered.
means someone had to sponsor you, and the person had to be responsible for you. It's not like there's welfare today. You come here and you're on welfare. If you didn't have someone who would support you
In the other country?
yeah,
So like a family member?
pardon me,
So like a family member or someone?
a family member or friend. Usually it had to be a family member, but they were able to circumvent that because they could say, yeah, I'm your cousin, you know. They couldn't prove that. So that's how my next came first. So my mother and father said, we don't want you to stay here till our next, because we don't know when our next is coming. You go and we'll follow. And that's how I left. And that's how my parents stayed behind. And by the time their next came, it was too late because the war had already broken out. They tried, there's a long story about relatives who didn't really want to send the ticket in time. When the next actually came, it was a matter of days that they could get out and not be caught in this web. So
So you were out of jail at the time when Kristallnacht happened. So what was that like?
Yeah. When I came out of jail and time had elapsed and Kristallnacht came, see, we had no food, so my father went every day to the Joint Distribution Committee. It was a Jewish committee that had soup kitchens. And you went there and you got your meal every day. So my father went carrying 2 shopping bags, a part of in each, to bring food home every day. And the one day when he went, that's when Kristallnacht had already erupted the night before, but we didn't know it. When he came to the soup kitchen, they were waiting for all these Jewish men to arrest him. And my father was one of them. And we didn't know why my father wasn't coming home till we finally found out he'd been put in jail. But he was lucky that he wasn't sent to an extermination camp yet. They released him after a few days. And then we found out how they had ransacked all the stores that hadn't been ransacked yet, how all the windows were broken, how the Jews were taken into the street, and that described the streets and their beards cut off, and all the things that you heard about. That's what was happening then.
Where were you living at the time?
In the apartment where we lived before, except the law was, even though it was a small apartment, that you couldn't live in the apartment yourself, the family. You had to share it with someone else, another Jewish family who was thrown out of their place. So we shared this tiny apartment with my mother's friend, her husband, and her daughter.
So was your neighborhood personally affected by Kristallnacht?
These were all Christian people. Nobody had anything to do with us. Nobody talked to us. And I know that later on, after I left, Jews couldn't live in that area anymore. They had to go to like a ghetto kind of area to live.
So
I don't know, I might have forgotten something.
No, you weren't aware that Kristallnacht had broken out the night before because your neighborhood was Christian and no damage took place there. Is that?
I didn't know. No.
Mm-hmm.
We only found out the next day.
And did you see the damage?
No, I didn't see any damage because our damage was already done way before in our apartment, and the area. There were a couple other Jewish stores in the neighborhood, but I don't know what happened to them. But a big part, whatever was left to be destroyed, was destroyed then.
Incidentally, if, excuse me, if anyone had insurance against damage and riots and what have you, the insurance companies were not allowed to pay this out to the owners of the store or business. But the insurance company were obligated to pay the amount, but give it to the German government. It's unbelievable.
Before we talk about you going to America, were the guards when you were in prison, were they Austrian guards or German guards?
These were Austrian. Some of them were women, there were a few men. As a matter of fact, one Austrian guard, a woman, a couple of times on a Sunday, sneaked a little bit extra bread to us girls, and she put, what do you call it? Pig fat, what do you call it? Not meaning to harm us, just to be nice to us. Instead of butter, you use it, right? She gave us that. And also on the same floor was a group of prostitutes. They'd been arrested. And the reason the prostitutes were arrested is in Austria, prostitution is legal if you have a book that shows that you go and get examined every month and that your health is okay. And you pay a certain fee for being a prostitute. As a matter of fact, what's interesting, I don't think I told you that last time, before the war, we had a neighbor who was a high-class call girl. And she was very, very nice and very pretty. And my mother used to allow me to go in her apartment, and she used to take me to the park sometimes. My mother was busy, And once she even took me to the dentist. And she had a boyfriend who was an American. I don't know what he was at the embassy. He came with a big car. And but aside from this boyfriend, she also did other business, So when she heard, talked about different languages. I was learning French in school. So she said she knows some English, and she told me a phrase. She thought that was a cute phrase. She said, "Time is money." So apparently the boyfriend told her time is, so she always said to me, "Rosie, time is money." So when I came to the United States, I didn't know any English, but I knew time is money.
How did the jailers treat you when you were in prison?
How what?
How did the jailers treat you when you were in prison?
The jailers, they did not, they just brought us this miserable food that we had, and suddenly we did get a little piece of cheese with the bread. And they just had nothing to do with us. This one warden, as I said, once in a while brought us a little extra bread, and she went like this and just handed it us secretly.
So, what year did you immigrate to America?
November 9th. I left October 30th, 1939, and then I went all by myself on the train to Genoa. That's where I boarded the ship. I came on the Rex, R-E-X, an Italian ship. So I went all by myself. My mother took me to the train, and you know, to this day I have a blank about it. I think my father at that time was in jail because I only remember her coming to put me on the train. And I remember she put me on the train, she went down, and then she real fast came up the steps and hugged me once more. And so I arrived in Genoa, and my mother spoke to a few people on the train for a minute, and they were also going. And so the people looked out, you know. And I stayed in a hotel overnight. And then the next day we boarded the ship. And I was all by myself on the ship. I don't know how far, is that, do you want to keep going up to that point?
Did you see your cousins before you left?
No.
And were you in, what city did you depart from?
Genoa, in Italy.
And how do you spell that?
Genoa, Genoa. Okay.
What was the voyage like?
Unbelievably sissy. After we passed Gibraltar, and the sea became very stormy because it was November. It was a very, very and that was the largest Italian boat. The waves went actually over the boat. I guess I'm trying to think how many tons that boat was, but I know it was the largest Italian boat. And the first night I was still okay before we went to Gibraltar. There was a group of Nazis, because America wasn't at war yet with Germany, who were apparently going, I don't know what their reason was, maybe to their embassy or whatever. And they had in their lapel the Nazi insignia, and they had dancing at night with the food. And one guy came over to me, and he had that insignia on, and he said, "Would you like to dance?" I said, "I don't know how to dance." So then I knew that I could never dance with anybody because I told him I don't know how to dance. But I didn't have to worry about that because the next day I was seasick anyway, you know. So there were two lovely, we shared a cabin, 4 people. That was to me an elderly lady. I'm sure she wasn't that old, but when you're 14, actually I was 15 when I left. She seemed old. I know she had false teeth because there were 2 young girls sharing my cabin. One was about 2 sisters, 17 and 18, I think. Beautiful redheads. And at night, I had the upper, there were bunk beds. 2 bunk beds. I had an upper, this lady had the lower, and the 2 girls shared a bunk. So at night when we got ready for bed, this lady took out her teeth for the night. And I was so hysterical about her taking that false teeth out, and they were laughing too. It was hilarious. But as I said, within a day or two, I don't know, it was a day or two, the sea was so stormy, and I was so sick. I never saw the dining room again. Plus, they had Italian food. I tried a few times to go up the deck. As soon as I smelled all this Italian pasta and tomato sauce, and Italian food is very pungent. I had to go back, so the girls used to bring me tea and toast and a little something, I don't know what else, and that's how I survived. Then, just the day before we came to New York, the girl says, it was better. As a matter of fact, a couple of times I even tried to get on deck, but I practically threw up over the deck. It was terrible. So the girl says, well, now it's less stormy, you got to try and come up because before long the Statue of Liberty is going to come. I did make it up, and I saw the Statue of Liberty, and that's a sight it's hard to explain to someone who doesn't know about that.
How long were you on the boat?
I was on a boat, let's see, I guess 8 days. I left October 30th, Vienna, and then I was on a boat 9 days, I think, 8 or 9 days, I don't know.
Were the people on the boat and the people in your room from different places?
Yeah, the two girls, I think the lady was from somewhere I was thinking about where they were going, with the destination. No, they came from Vienna. So when we arrived in New York, you want to keep going on that, or are we going to stop that for next time?
No,
We'll keep going.
We'll still go until the end of the war period, even though you're in America. But I was just wondering, because when you were put in jail, you were 14, and then when you were leaving, you were 15. So do you remember the last birthday you had?
The last birthday I had at home.
When you turned 15, do you remember what that was
Nobody
like?
made anything of it. There was no big deal. It was just a birthday. I mean, it was not a party or something. People were in no mood for parties. I remember when I was younger, that my cousin Clara that I mentioned in the earlier tape, who was learning the Montessori method of teaching, when she went back to Poland, she always remembered my birthday very nicely. And one year she sent me a beautiful chocolate cake from Poland, which of course was another country, and she had baked into it or snuck into the little gold insignia ring. And when I cut the cake, the ring fell out. Got that ring and everything, I had some nice little jewelry that was all taken out, didn't have anything.
What did you bring with you?
Clothes.
Just clothes?
Yeah. Well, I had a full suitcase of, I guess, underwear. People didn't have so many changes of clothes, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I had a couple of nice dresses. The girls didn't wear pants in those days, so I had some skirts and blouses and a little jacket. And I had a suit, a handbag like the girls wear today, you know, the big handbags. When I arrived in the United States, people were wearing small handbags. So the minute they'd see me with that large handbag, they would say, oh, a greener. That means in Yiddish, a greener means like a green person means just arrived, you know, not even ripe, you know, a greener. So as soon as they saw me in the street, they said, oh, you must be a greener because I had this big suit, handbag.
When you departed the boat, you were in New York?
I was in New York, but not in Ellis Island. That was closed long before. I came on the west side, Hudson River, New York Harbor.
Was there anyone there to meet you?
Yes, my uncle and aunt, the one who had sponsored me.
Were they your uncle or aunt on your father or mother's side?
On my mother's side, he was my mother's brother. And he was a very nice, kind man. They were quite up in age and they lived in very, very modest circumstances on the Lower East Side. And they had no children and they didn't know what to do with a 15-year-old. They couldn't understand that mentality. Just like I don't understand it today.
So, what
So
was it?
they had a very little small apartment. They had a 1-bedroom. I slept, they had like a little pull-out large chair in the living room, you know. And since I was only 15, by law, I was obligated to still attend school here in the United States, in New York, on the Lower East. So my uncle and aunt knew nothing about school and what age a child is supposed to be in what grade. So they told the superintendent of the building, who had a daughter, take her to school and the teacher will put her in the class. So they put me in a much lower grade than I was supposed to be. Of course I spoke no English, but still, you know, today they give kids all this new American instructions and all that. That wasn't really there, except there was one elderly teacher who used to let a couple of us who were new to the country attend a lesson or two after school, and she taught us a little bit of English. So by the time I realized that I was in the wrong grade, I could see I started to understand subjects that I was bored and that I knew all the stuff they were teaching. It was too late because by then I was 16, my uncle, who had not been well, got very sick, and I had to start work in a knitting factory. I went to work in a knitting factory, but also went to night school at night.
Where were your aunt and uncle from?
My uncle was from the same hometown as my mother in Poland. My mother was born in Poland. The name of the town, I don't know if you want to know it, but...
Sure.
Oh, all right. It has a different Russian name now because it's not the Ukraine. But in Polish, it's C like in zebra, L-O-C, C as in zebra, O-W. It's Russian.
Okay.
Yeah. So I worked in a knitting factory on a knitting machine, not knitting by hand. They were making Army and Navy gloves. And I wasn't used to that kind of work, of course, but somehow adjusted. And all the operators mostly were also German or Austrian refugees. That's all the people in the factory.
How?
Can we take a little break or something?
I just have a question. Were you able to be in touch with your family at all at this time, or did you know what was happening back at home?
Yes. My mother kept corresponding with me and telling me how desperate they are and to see that, you know, that everything is done on this side to expedite their coming here. As a matter of fact, I had some of my mother's letters and I translated them and I made a little booklet, and all of my children and grandchildren have one of those to give the history of her writing me how desperate they are to get out. So till the war broke out with the United States and Germany, and there was no more communication, I corresponded with my mother. Not too frequently because, see, airmail even in those days took maybe 2 or 3 weeks, right?
Was non-existent. Was non-existent.
But it was a thin envelope.
Doesn't matter. There was no.
I think it was Luftpost, yes. I remember my mother's envelope said Luftpost, which means by air.
Would you like to take a break?
Yeah, I think I like a little break.
Okay.
It's a little emotional.
It's fine.
My name is Katie Hall. I'm here with students from Goucher College from the Oral History of the Holocaust Survivors class. And I'm here with Hannah Spiegelman as the note taker, and not pictured is Allison Susser, our videographer. We're here with Rosa Marx. This is the second interview on the second tape. So, what was it like working in the knitting factory?
Oh, well, we were all like a large family. Of course, we didn't have time to socialize. You were in piecework, you know, according how much you produced, that's how you got paid. And, you know, they first show you how to do it, and then you continued doing it till you had a break. You know, they gave you a little bit of a break at lunchtime. And also, the wages were very, very poor. And it was a time in this country when a lot of people were trying to organize to unions to get better wages. In our factory, there was talk about trying to get into the union to see if we could get better pay. So I was one of the girls who was one of the organizers, and we went to talk to the union. And the union did get in. The union headquarters was on Union Square, 14th Street in New York. That's where they were located. And the strange part, though, is that we had very little improvement when the union got in. The reason I think today, and I even knew it years ago, is simply this. The union guys were really corrupt too, and they got paid off by the owners not to push too hard. So it was a little better, but it was, you know, it was all crooked. It was crooked. That's all it was. It was crooked. And during that time, I was very anxious about what had happened to my parents, because then the war had broken out and I had no contact. And I began to have sort of a lot of apprehension and nervousness. Plus, my uncle, where I lived, was getting sicker and sicker. And so I slept in the living room, and he'd wander around in that little apartment at night because he was not well at all. And I couldn't really get any rest. So I had a girlfriend who was working and living with the family like a nanny, but that was her job only at night. She also had a day job. And she said, these people have friends who would love to have you in the same setup that I have. You take care of the children at night, and you help a little at dinner time, and when they go out, you know, as a babysitter, and you have your own room. And there's no pay involved, but it's like room and board. So things got so bad, so I decided, yes, I would do that. And I moved in with a nice family in Brooklyn. I lived in Manhattan at the same time. Their name was Lieberman. And they had two boys, two really bratty little kids. And I also was going to, so I still kept this knitting job. And I went to school at night a couple of times. The rest of the time I babysat and I worked. And then it got to a point where this factory job was really very, very hard on me because I wasn't really well. So I wasn't well and I went to work. So there was a neighbor next door, a family. They had two daughters and they befriended me. They were a little older than I was. And the one daughter told me that there's a very large company headquarters in New York. The name of the company was Standard Brands Incorporated. They're like General Foods is today, you know, a very large corporation. She says, why don't you go and apply for a job there? So actually, I had quit school at 16. I was going to evening classes, but I didn't have a high school diploma. I went and applied at the employment office. They had 500 girls in that office alone. That's how big. They had 7 floors on Madison Avenue. I went to be interviewed, and the man liked what I told him and everything. And then I said to him, if I got the job, I'd be willing to keep going to school till I got my diploma and go to business school. And then he hemmed and hawed, and I said to him, I guess you're not employing me because I'm Jewish. And they didn't have any Jews in that office, maybe one or two at the most. He says, oh no, he says, I'm going to let you come and work here, and you promise me you're going to go finish school and everything. And it was really unheard of that he did, accept. So for a few weeks I worked in the shipping department where they deliver the mail and you bring it to all the offices. You carried a big mail pouch and you went. Then that only lasted a few weeks, and they said, you can come and work in the filing department, which was like an upgrade from the mailing department. I worked for a while in the filing department. There was a woman there that I also thought she was an old lady. I guess she wasn't old, but she was very stern and strict. But I did my job well. She was very satisfied with me. And when I used to go to the international division on the floor where they were, they all liked me, and they said, I think we want you to come and work in our section of the filing department, the international division. So she said, yeah, I can, No, that wasn't, they didn't ask me. She told me they asked for me in the international division, and I can go and work for them over there in that department. After I worked for a while in the international division filing department, they gave me a couple girls to work with me who had high school diplomas and I don't know that, but I was their boss. After that, they liked me in the international division because when they were looking for a file, some of the real big shots, presidents and vice presidents, they never could find the files. They said, you have it in the file, go look for it, you'll find it. I said, oh no, it's on your desk or in your desk file drawer. So I used to go, and they say, okay, show me. So I used to go in there and show them the file. They had it all along, So that impressed me because I knew all the files and I had a good memory and I could remember everything. As a matter of fact, I have a letter still for my recommendation when I left. So after a while, Eleanor McNaughton, who was the sales promotion manager and the advertising manager of the international division, they said, we want you to be our, they call her secretary here, but what was I? I was the
I
assistant.
wasn't there.
What title did I have when I worked for Eleanor McNaughton?
Well, I could find it.
Anyway, I'll think about the title I had anyway. So I said, yes, I'd like to come and work for you. And so I accepted that job, and then the head of the filing department got wind of that, and she said, you never asked me if you can change jobs and be with the advertising department. I said, I didn't know I had to ask you for permission. So she gave me holy hell because I didn't ask her for permission. It really irked her because basically I almost had a better job than she did. And she was born in this country and she had the education and I didn't.
What sort of work were you doing?
Oh, now I know what it was. I was administrative assistant, but today administrative assistant is a secretary. In those days it was better than a secretary. So I used to go with Eleanor McNaughton. She used to do layouts. She used to, we worked with two big advertising agencies in New York, and they would take pictures. She wrote cookbooks, and we would go and look at the samples, how the pages they would make, the food and everything. Very, very interesting. And whatever, like if a salesman wanted to see her, I would be the one to hold him off, to find out was it important enough for her to take the call, was it all kinds of stuff. And also at that time, the head of the international division, John Mitchell, who had come from the Keller Company, he liked me a lot. I also was a receptionist there at times. And sometimes he'd say, get so-and-so on the phone, this number. And I used to get so nervous because to retain all that, you know, it was a whole big deal. And the Christmas party from Standard Brands was always at the Waldorf Astoria. I guess you all know the Waldorf, in the Starlight Room. And in those days, husbands or wives were not allowed to come with you to the Christmas party. You went by yourself. The big shots and the other people. And you should have seen how these big shots got drunk at these parties. Unbelievable. A friend and I hid all night in the ladies' room so they couldn't get a hold of us. And yeah, so the guy says to me, I was sitting next to him, John Mitchell. He says, oh, you don't have to call me Mr. Mitchell, call me John. The next day, he didn't even know what he said, you know. But I enjoyed it because it was a terrific, interesting time. And the people were so nice to me. In the accounting department, they insisted to do my income tax. In the, they had all kinds of departments. Everybody only tried to do me favors, and these were all Christian people. And I was one of a few Jewish girls in the whole building. And when I met Werner, as a matter of fact, they used to also call me in the office sometimes to politicize with me, because I was more on the left. These were all real conservatives. So when the election would go on, they would talk to me about politics. And they thought it was hilarious that I would be more so liberal, and you know, they were entirely against it. When I started dating Werner and we were serious, they used to ask me about my dates. You know, the big shots used to come in the office because they were watching over me. You know, they knew I had nobody. So when we got really serious, I figured I'd give Werner for Hanukkah a nice wallet. So I went to Mark Cross, that's the finest leather shop in New York. Do you know Mark Cross? No? Well, you lived in New York, okay, on Fifth Avenue. And I bought him a lizard wallet, very fine, and then he had it for years and years, and I spent $50. So when I told Mr. Lindau, asked me, so where did you get your boyfriend? I said, I got him a wallet. Where did you get it? Mark Cross. What did you spend? $50. Oh, he went crazy. He said, that's way too much money to spend on a guy.
What was it like outside of work? So I
had a lot of friends, because we were a whole group of people who came here to escape the Nazis from Germany and from Austria. And we didn't have an official club, but one person introduced the other, so there was never a problem with friends. And some were very, very good friends. Of course, during the war, a lot of the boys were inducted, and the only ones who remained were the 4 Fs, you know what that means.
Yeah.
Some of them were very nice, but I didn't do a lot of dating exactly during the war, but I corresponded with a lot of boys during the war.
So the 4 Fs would just be the men who weren't fit to go into
To
battle.
serve. What does 4F mean?
4F means that you're not physically capable to be a soldier.
Okay, I don't know what I'm trying to say now. So,
Did you get any news from how the war was going or anything? And in
only
America
what I
as
read
well?
in the newspaper. And I had a long ride to go to New York when I had that office job, because the people that I stayed with, that took care of the boys, lived in Brooklyn and Flatbush. That was the last stop on the subway. And before I took the subway, I had to take a trolley. In the winter, it was terrible. Sometimes the trolley, it was snowing and ice. Trolley didn't come for 15 minutes or longer. So then I took the trolley to the subway, and then I took the subway into Manhattan.
Were there a lot of soldiers around at the time? Or
Yeah,
periodically?
there were soldiers on leave, yeah. As a matter of fact, a group of us girls, for 2 years during the war, rented a little bungalow on the beach in Ronkonkoma, New York. For weekends we would go there. We would take the train out, and then we'd hitch rides to get to the bungalow. Those days you weren't afraid to hitch a ride. Rolo's got a ride. So there were 6 of us. And 3 of the girls were married, their husbands were overseas.
Did you receive any other correspondence from any family back in Austria?
No, there was
Or
no,
just your mother?
no, because no, there was nobody left. I had an uncle who went illegally to Palestine. There was a way to other countries. I don't know, was it Greece and Turkey and mountains? As a matter of fact, he wanted my father I wasn't there anymore, but my cousin was still there, told me that he wanted my father to come along, but he said my father wasn't going without my mother, and my mother was not, as a woman, fit to climb mountains and rivers and all the hardships. So he stayed behind. He maybe could have saved himself, you know.
You said you read about the war in the newspapers. What did you think when you read these things about what was happening? Did you
Well, the
think
people
about the events?
with the concentration camps, there was talk that there was something going on, but people really didn't know about the extermination camps. And those who knew, how was that story? Denied that it exists, that it wasn't. They said it isn't that bad. It's all propaganda. They're
See,
just
the big
making.
problem was, in the First World War, the British spread rumors what the Germans did
In the First World War.
in the First World War, and it wasn't all true. So when in the Second World War, rumors got started, someone said, you can't believe everything that the British say. But unfortunately, it was true.
Did you believe it?
Hmm?
Did you believe what you read?
Did I believe what I read? Yes, I more or less didn't see any reason why it should be a lie, you know. But basically, it was all, you know, some of it was hearsay. Of course, concentration camps existed even the days when I was still there, you know, like, what are the 2 concentration camps that existed where you have upper
Yes, of course, everybody knew.
Yeah,
Everybody knew.
but they were not considered extermination camps. That came later. First they were just concentration camps.
And every German knew that bad things are happening in these concentration camps. They didn't know exactly, and it wasn't known that some of these concentration camps were Vernichtungslager, which is in English,
Killer camps.
that we didn't know. And it wasn't that well reported either. In the New York Times, occasionally, on page 50 maybe, there's a small little article where they talked about it.
And also,
But not really.
also later it came out that Roosevelt had people, they came to see Roosevelt and told him about what was going on. And Roosevelt felt that for him politically it was not good to save the Jews at this point, because they would say that he was not really concentrating on the problems that were there instead of, you know, and just looking after the Jews. It was
There was a Polish army officer who was smuggled into the concentration camps. And they smuggled him in, took photographs, and he was told they're going to get him out again. There was a Jewish underground. Get him out again. They're going to send him to Palestine, and from there he was supposed to go to the United States and tell the world what really
What's happening.
was happening. And they did it.
He went
The
to
man-
see Roosevelt.
The man saw Roosevelt, and Roosevelt was sympathetic, but he couldn't do anything by himself. He had to have people to help him and form a policy. So he told General Marshall what he's been told. There's an eyewitness in my office today who talks about it. What can we do? He says they'll check into it. He came back a few weeks later, Mr. President, the only thing we can do is try to win this
To win the war.
as fast as possible. There's nothing we can do about it, which was not true.
In while you were in New York, in America, were there any anti-Semitism in America that you could
Incident?
see? Yes.
Well, the only incident I really came across is later. I guess you're gonna do that next week. About there was something when we came to live in Baltimore.
Yeah, I'll just make a note of it.
You make a note of it, yeah, because it's where we had our first furnished apartment about the neighbor next door.
So you were in America at the time that America started in the war.
Yes,
So you were there in the days leading up to that, and also D-Day, not D-Day, sorry, Pearl Harbor, when Pearl Harbor was
yeah.
attacked. Did you notice any growing sort of sentiments?
Anyone?
Any growing sentiments of people thinking that the United States should go to war? Did anybody ever talk about it?
Well, yeah, I think people. So there was a feeling that something was going to happen, that it couldn't go on like that.
Did you hear about the Pearl Harbor attacks?
Yes, yes. As a matter of fact, I know exactly where I was that day because I had a date that day, and a boy came up to see me, and as we went to the movies, we were in the movies, and they suddenly said Pearl Harbor has been attacked, and all the fellows who were in uniform had to get up and report to their posts.
What was it like after that?
Well, I guess, there was a draft. The draft was actually before, right? Before.
Yes.
But I guess more and more people got drafted, and they assembled enough, I guess, military personnel to get things going. But I wasn't so much involved in the overall thing as my everyday life, you know.
So did your everyday life go on as it had been?
Yeah, except there was rationing, they rationed food. And as I said, all the boys suddenly were gone because the ones who hadn't been inducted yet usually left. And a lot of the young families, I wasn't really friendly with young couples with children or so, but a lot of young couples were affected. And parents, mothers saw their children, their boys go off.
What were your aunt and uncle doing at the time? Was your uncle still sick?
No, my uncle had already died then.
When did he die, and did you hear about that? Did you visit your aunt and uncle at all?
Oh, did I visit them?
Mm.
Oh yeah, I used to visit them, but not too often because there was hardly any days that I had opened where I could see them.
Did you find out any information about your family members or your mother and father or cousins of what had happened to them?
Well, I knew that my aunt, the one who had the little girl who was 7 years younger than I, that looked up to me the way I looked up to my older cousin, they had gone illegally to Belgium, and she had written me to New York a tiny little note torn from some little scrapbook. It's amazing. I have that note. I gave it to the museum too. Please send us some food. You know, there were like agencies where you could send people food sometimes. And so I knew that she lived there. But then when I worked as a volunteer for the Red Cross, I was 10 years, as a matter of fact, I still have my ticket. I was one of the original volunteers in the War Victims and Holocaust volunteers to search for people. So her name came up with her husband and child that she was transported to Auschwitz. And my parents, their name also came up. They were found, you know, they had records, found records.
They had been to Auschwitz? Is that
No, they had been sent to the ghetto of Lodz, L-O-D-Z. And I don't know if they survived Lodz, they were sent to Auschwitz, because people who survived Lodz, when they emptied out the ghettos, were sent to Auschwitz. So they either perished in Lodz or were sent to Auschwitz.
Could you
That-
spell it again?
Lodz, L-O-D-Z.
L-O-D-Z?
Yes. Can you think of any questions? Can you remember anything else from your time during the war in America that you haven't talked about?
The time during the war. I don't know, I think people were just very patriotic, you know. It's a different feeling today. Today, we don't even know there's really a war going on and people dying in Afghanistan and all over, because the average person really hasn't lost anybody. These are volunteers today. In those days, everybody had to go and serve. So it was a very patriotic feeling. People knew you had to win the war, because if you didn't, it would be unthinkable of what the consequences would be.
Do you remember where you were and what you were thinking when you heard of the end of the war? That it was over?
The end of the war?
Mm-hmm.
I really don't know where I was when I'm trying to... I don't remember.
Do you remember what you thought or what the general
Well, it was a
feeling
feeling
was?
of relief that we won. And there was so much going on, you know, to get back to some kind of normalcy. The boys were coming home. The families who knew that their soldiers or sailors weren't coming home. There were a lot of people who came home with all kinds of, like, amputees and all kinds of terrible stuff. And it took quite a while to get back, because after the war I met Werner, you know, he was a blind date. He had been really, he was a soldier.
When did you realize that you weren't going to see your family again?
I think I knew that already for quite a while, because from the stories that were coming out, I couldn't see. Although the strangest part is, for a good number of years, I used to have dreams that my parents survived. These were dreams. And then when they survived, they looked so different. And that sometimes they were both back in the apartment, and sometimes only one survived. But they let me know one survived, and I didn't know which one survived. And I said to myself, whom would I want to survive, my mother or my father? And I was torn in my dream which one I wanted to survive. And then eventually this dream started. Did I tell you that I dreamt that?
I think I had one more question, but I forgot. Oh, what were sort of, you worked a lot in the knitting factory at first, and then in the office and with the children. But when you weren't working, did you have anything that you liked to do?
Oh yeah,
Any sort
well
of favorite
first of all, when the
place?
Liebermans went out at night, I could always invite someone over. They didn't mind that at all. So sometimes I'd have a boy or girl come over and we'd spend the thing. And if they went out on a Sunday, they usually have a card game in their house. No, if they went out Saturday, they'd have a card game and I could go out on Sunday. So I went out on Sundays. And then we had, I said we didn't have a real club, but we were just very close-knit friends.
And these were the other refugees?
These were also the refugees here. And we had this beach place. And I'm trying to think. Oh yeah, the reason I was able to go to that beach place was this. The two boys I'd forgotten went to summer camp. So for a number, like a couple of months almost, they were away. And Mrs. Lieberman had gone to a reducing farm. In those days even they had places where you could go to reduce weight. They called it a fat farm, but that's, that's what they called it. And so I could be spending my weekends away at the beach. I was trying to figure out how did I do that. Now I know. I forgot all about that.
Did you, was it very different being in America from being in Vienna? How about like in terms of the food being different or anything like that?
No, because basically the food wasn't that different because what Mrs. Lieberman cooked, my aunt was a terrible cook. All she ever cooked was boiled chicken and chicken soup, and my mother was a very good cook, and we even had a housekeeper. So I had to adjust to the food, but it didn't really matter. So that part was okay. I'm trying to think. I missed the cakes and pastries and things, but I had so many other things to think about, it really wasn't that important.
Did you keep kosher or go to any kind of Jewish...
You mean here in America?
In America, yes.
My aunt and uncle kept kosher. The Liebermans didn't keep kosher, but they got kosher meats, I think, mostly. No, basically, they were not kosher, Liebermans. And I didn't basically keep kosher because somehow, I don't know, Werner had placed no emphasis on it. We never have like meat and milk together, like dairy but we didn't buy like kosher meats and things like that. And we don't eat pork. It's just something we don't do.
Did you continue to celebrate Jewish holidays during the time that the war was going on in America?
Yeah, well, Liebermans had a Seder. My uncle and aunt, they just had a very little celebration. It was nothing, it wasn't like a big group thing, but they had no bread in the house, Passover. Mm-hmm. It was matzahs.
Was there a noticeable Jewish community in New York where you were?
Oh yes. First of all, where my uncle and aunt lived was the Lower East Side, which was basically populated by Italians and by Jews in those days. And after when I met Werner later, his sister, where he lived with, they lived in Upper West Side, and that was a very, very, they invited quite a lot of Jews living up there, and refugees, especially the Washington Heights. See, my father had a brother here too that I didn't mention, but he did very little to help my father come over, and I had very little contact with them.
Did you and the other refugees talk much about what had happened back where you had come from?
No, we didn't. We all loved good music. We did a lot of, we went on outings, like picnics, and they had a little boat go from New York to Staten Island, and some little resorts like Bear Mountains. We did a lot of stuff that didn't cost money, nature walks. Central Park was very nice. We had they always had concerts at Central Park. And Central Park was, I don't know if any of you know Central Park, it's very huge, and they had concerts there. And I'm trying to think what else we did. We went a little bit to the theater, but not too often because that was expensive. We did some movies. Trying to think what else we did.
Did you
Well,
have
we went for coffee and pastry. I'm not a coffee drinker, but to go to one of these little pastry shops, you know, sit around and talk for hours, or sit in the park for hours. And do a lot of hiking.
Did you have a favorite movie when you went to see the movies?
Well, when I was a child, I think I told you Shirley Temple. Here, I think it was, my favorite actor was Robert Taylor. And I remember the movie was Vivian Leigh. I don't know if you ever heard that actress. She was a well-known actress. Vivian Leigh, Leigh.
She was in Gone with the Wind.
Mm-hmm.
Vivian Leigh.
Yeah. And I remember I'd been on a date and we saw Waterloo Bridge in the movies.
Mm.
And the guy, when he took me to the door, he said, "Can I kiss you goodnight?" And I said, "What? After Robert Taylor?"
Did you talk with your friends about back home and what your life was like back in where you lived, or did you just talk about your life currently in
We
America?
just talked about life here, and occasionally something came up, maybe in a song or in a conversation that sort of took us back, but we basically didn't talk about it. I didn't talk about my jail time or any of that stuff.
On 72nd Street used to be a coffee shop where once famous Viennese actors came from, and they would put on a little play maybe, or they talk about the conditions here compared to what was once before. So one of the songs went something like this. Ich war einmal ein großer Bernhardiner.
Over there.
Which means at one time I was a big shot.
You know, a Bernadine dog, you know, these huge dogs. I was once a
But he
big...
compared himself to a Bernhardiner. But today I'm just a little dog.
A little dachshund.
And he became very famous in this country too. One thing I might add, conditions were entirely different in those days than they are today. People were willing to serve. People were willing
To fight for their country.
to fight for their country. I remember the 5th Regiment Armory here in Baltimore, which is the headquarters of the 29th Division. That was the first step of your army life. You either accepted or rejected. If you were rejected, you became 4F. And I remember there was a young man there. He was sitting on the steps and crying. Why was he crying? He was rejected, became a 4F. What a shame. I'm a young man, I'm healthy, and they tell me I couldn't serve. That's something that would be unheard of today.
You know, these were different times. Just can't compare it. Unfortunate part is they were all fighting the war and thought this was going to end the war of all wars, and things keep on going. There's no end to it. what it is.
Before we end, is there anything else that you would like to say, or anything that you can remember for during this time?
Any
I don't know,
specific
it'll probably
memories?
come to me later. But
I said, do you have any like specific memories that really stand out that you haven't shared?
what's that again?
Any specific memories that you have that stand out that you haven't shared?
Any memory?
Specific memories that you have that you didn't talk about.
No, I think I basically told you what means the most to me. I'm just trying to think about that period. It's the good part is, I guess, when you're 14 or 15 years old, you're more resilient, and you somehow you can bounce back, no matter what the hardships are. Nature somehow helps you. But I think we just had a certain maturity that kids don't have today. And I basically really, when I look at young people in college, I say, years ago, I would say the young people in high school were as mature as the ones in college. But the college population is not as mature. I say, well, years ago, because they basically all had a good life. The parents took care of them. They didn't really have to, most of them don't have to work for their schooling. So, when I went to school at night and worked during the day. And as a matter of fact, I did go to business school. I finished 2 years of business school. And the funniest part I might have forgotten to say is the business school manager, I guess there was a private school, came up to my aunt's house at the time. I was with my aunt then. And he said, I don't know how I'm going to accept you in business school. You don't have a high school diploma. I said, okay. So then he called back shortly later. As a matter of fact, my aunt didn't have a phone. We had to go to the neighbor. She didn't have a phone. And he said to me, I'll enroll you. You can start business school.
When did you start business school?
Yeah, I went for 2 years to Spencer, was the name, Spencer Business School. And then after I went to school, after a few weeks, this guy who was like the principal wanted to take me out on a date. I wasn't going on any date. First of all, I didn't like him, and I just know where was I going on a date. So I never find that, but I know he really, according to rules, shouldn't have let me enroll without a high school diploma.
What year was this? Do you remember?
Pardon me?
What year was this?
What year was this? Well, it was after I started Standard Brand. I must have been, I guess, 19 years old. So that was I was born in 1924. Figure it out. But that was the funniest thing. So the thing is, what always amazes me is this: you got to have enough nerve, and you got to ask. I always tell my children, I said, the worst and my grandchildren too, what's the worst anybody can say to you? It's no. What are you going to do? It's no. So I had enough gall to ask, and he said, okay.
So I don't have any more questions.
And we're good.
Okay.
Thank
think
you.
that's it
Thank
for
you
today.
so much, Rosa.
We'll go have a little cold drink and a little bit something. We gotta get a little refreshment after this.